Hello everyone, the Skilled Roy here, back with another Legends of Runeterra video, and today, oh my god, today they spoiled us rotten. They gave us cards for all the previous archetypes we've seen across Legends of Runeterra. There's been plenty of archetypes that we're really struggling, and I think that these cards are really gonna help deck builders come up with some new tools and come up with some new ways to enhance the previous cards that we had in other expansions. I think this is one really great way that Legends of Runeterra does something that most other card games, let's be honest, don't really do, and that is support previous archetypes. Archetypes that have been quote-unquote forgotten about, right? Like, we're gonna see a deep card here, we're gonna see a dragon card here, we're gonna see even a crimson card here. So strap in and let's start deck building. All right, so the first card we have is Lost Riches. 4 mana, burst speed spell, draw a treasure. If there aren't any to draw, create 2 treasures in your deck instead. This is a really interesting card. So for those of you who don't know, Shipwreck Hoarder is a card that occasionally saw play in Deep, but eventually was kind of mostly cut just because it was a little too slow for what people really wanted. While you could get treasures faster by holding your toss cards till after you shuffle them in, one big issue with that, of course, was that you often were trying to use your toss cards early so you would hit deep on curve for Nautilus, which meant that it was kind of hard to actually get those treasures. But now this is a way for you to easily access and draw one of those treasures for 4 mana. Of course, that means it's gonna be 9 mana to actually play out the treasure because again, it costs 5 to play each of the treasures, but this is still quite good. I'm also quite interested because you can actually shuffle some treasures in early before you start tossing, since this is only 4 mana, and then get them a little bit earlier than you might expect. Not to mention it works great in doubles, because those people start being able to draw them back to your deck as well. Honestly, this card is quite good, and I'm actually really interested to try it out in deep decks. I still think it might be a little too slow. Again, 9 mana is a lot to actually have to cast this, and then cast the treasure. It's just like, if I had infinite mana, maybe this would be much better, but I think right now, at the very least, it's worth trying, just as a quick splash into your deck to, hey, quickly on turn 4, throw this in there. If I'm not gonna die, I can try to have a different sort of game plan than the usual go deep and start running them over with sea monsters. Overall though, I think the card is pretty decent. I think there's a couple angles for her to try it on, but the most exciting part for me though is that they're not only is Riot making cards for the new cards that are coming out, obviously we already know that Bilgewater is getting Pike. Not only are they making Pike cards, but they're also going to be making cards that support previous archetypes, and that's what's so fulfilling to me as playing this card game, really, is that I know that even though if I love an archetype, so for example, Fearsome's Nocturne, for example, right? I got another card for it just now with Kindred, with Unto Dusk, right? So I know that they are not only making new archetypes, but they're still supporting old archetypes in a very unique and fulfilling way, and I think that's the best part about Legends of Runeterra, let's be honest, right? So this card specifically might not see a ton of play, but it is at least something for us to experiment with and us to try in our former archetypes. Even just adding this one card would have been great, but there is one more. Okay, next up we have the 4 mana spell, Loaded Dice. For the rest of the round, when you damage the enemy nexus, nab 1. Wow, I honestly didn't think they'd bring back nab, if I'm being completely honest. A lot of people really didn't like nab, a lot of people don't like losing to their own cards. I personally think it's totally a valid strategy, so I'm sorry, feel free to condemn me if you must, but I think this card is actually quite interesting. I think the best use for this is really going to be using warning shots, or perhaps Rex. If you manage to get a bunch of mana, you drop this, then you drop Rex, you're going to be getting a ton of their cards. I think this card is really just gonna be great for memes and really fun, elusive mini hybrid decks with some of the Fizz style decks, where it lets you real quickly redraw a handful of other assorted cards. But do I see it being incredibly constructive playable? It feels like a lot of commitment, if I'm being completely honest. You're gonna have to play this, it's 4 mana already. You probably already have to have a board state of units that are going to attack. If you're connecting with 3, 4 plus units anyways, you're probably already winning the game, right? So it's just I'm interested in this card. I just can't help but feel it might be a little too slow. I'm gonna try it out though. I'm definitely gonna make at least one deck with this, because I do love nab, but I'm not too sure this is the card that's gonna make it incredibly powerful. All right, now to the Demacia cards. We got a 6 mana 7/7, Towering Stonehorn. I don't take damage from enemy spells or skills. Wow, 6 mana 7/7. Man, you're definitely passing the vanilla test there. This is very reminiscent of Badger Bear's original stat line, which was a 3 mana 4/4. Now, is this card good enough? I know it seems crazy, right? Oh my god, it can't take damage. It's above average in stats. But the thing is that 6 mana in Demacia is probably the most contested slot next to 4/5 mana, and that's because Cythria and Genevieve both exist, and both of those two have been at war with each other since they've been printed together. And I'm not sure if I really want to be spending 6 mana on a 7/7 that can get chump blocked to death versus Cytherea, who gives evasion, and Genevieve, who has Scout and Challenger. This is notably less interesting than those two to me, at least in most decks. If I were to actually say one thing about this card I want to test is, I want to know if single combat still does damage to it. And I know that seems insane. Of course it should, right? But here's the thing. When you single combat someone's unit, it counts towards their progression for cards like Swain, which Swain specifically says, we've dealt damage, which implies that they've considered it as the opponent's effect in a way. So I want to test this with single combat. If this works with single combat where it just doesn't take damage, maybe that'd be cool. But I think, unfortunately, since it will still count as your spell, even though the enemy is striking you, it shouldn't probably count. But it's at least something to try, because I know it's somewhat odd with how it works with Swain. So I want to at least give it a shot and make sure for sure, you know? Overall, though, not super prolifically powerful. I can see this being incredibly good in Expedition mode, where I think this card's gonna be like, pick it every single time you see it. But on its own and constructed, I'm not too sure if you want to be playing this over Genevieve or Cytherea. Okay, next up we have Dragon Chow, the 1 mana 0/3. When you play a dragon, it strikes me and you draw 1. Honestly, this card was actually made by a good friend of mine, Revlid, in the custom card section, where they basically made this and said, wait a second, shouldn't it be perfect if like dragons can strike your own creatures, kill them, and get the bonuses? It makes a lot of sense too, because Fury doesn't specifically state an enemy, it just says kills a unit. So I think it makes a lot of sense there. Now, I'm really excited to see this sort of card, because this is exactly what like dragons hypothetically kind of needed. They needed a way to get their ball rolling much sooner, but not too overpowered to the point where they're just completely unbeatable, right? The fact that it also draws you a card, the fact that it can be used as an emergency blocker on turn 1, like, if, like, for example, the opponent plays Urchin, they attack you, you can block with this, and it has 1 health. Now, the opponent is going to be like, oh, god damn it, I don't want to kill this thing because I'm wasting removal on, or burn damage on, like, a 0/3. It's really not going to affect the board. But at the same time, they're scared of the dragon you're going to play on turn 4 that's going to strike this and then get the stats. So, honestly, I'm actually quite impressed by this card. I think this card is surprisingly decent, and it shores up a lot of the issues that I think Dragons really had against some of the faster decks in the game. We'll see just how good it can get, but I think that this is right up there with a possible card that can make Dragons at least a little bit more formidable. And I think that's all that these sort of cards really need to do, is just push the archetypes that are a little bit underperforming just a little bit harder, and I think that this will get more competitive, at least that way. Honestly, I'm thinking this is gonna be a solid, like, maybe 2 over 3 of in most Dragon decks. I'm really excited to see stuff like this. Great job on this one. Okay, next up for Faljord cards, we have the 2 mana burst speed spell, Ancestral Boon. Grant the top ally of your deck +2/+2, and Enlightened instead grant all allies in your deck +2/+2. If I'm being completely honest, this is one of the few times where I'm like, man, that Enlightened effect is kind of just bad. Like, if you really wanted to do this, right, are you gonna wait till turn 10 to cast the spell when Hearthguard's on turn 5? I don't know. I feel like buffing your deck on turn 10 is kind of like pointless at that point. But I will say though, the front half of this card effect is still quite interesting, and here's why. They just introduced Predict to the game. Now, already when I saw Predict, I was like, oh cool, you can set up your cards for things like Omen Hawk now. So I think this card is actually quite decent. Since it's spell mana only, you'll be able to more reliably set up a setup where you can go like, okay, turn 3, I'm gonna play the Prediction 2/3, put a Braum on top of my deck, then I cast this Ancestral Boon from my hand, so I know that Braum is getting +2/+2, draw Braum for turn 5, play him, boom, attack, right? Like, just, there's just so much actually decent plays you can make with this that I'm actually kind of impressed. This card is surprisingly decent with Predict, because it lets you set up your buffs in a way that are much more relevant than ever before, I think. We'll see just how good it gets with Predict and how many more Predict cards we can make that are make this card sort of good, but I'm very hopeful for it, you know? I'm very hopeful. Okay, next up we have Spoils of War, the 3 mana burst speed spell. Grant an ally +1/+2, or plunder, grant them +2/+4 instead. Wow, what a powerful buff, honestly. I think the main issue obviously here is you need to find a way to deal plunder damage before the opponent is able to, before it's your turn to attack, right? I feel like a lot of the Faljord cards have this weakness where you'd almost always want to prefer to play the plunder before the attack rather than after the attack, because a lot of their cards are inherently beneficial towards before the combat phase. For example, such as the Wolf Rider, which would want to be on the board to use its overwhelm, but you kind of want to hold it back because you want to be able to ramp your mana, right? So there's always been some sort of a small issue with the plunder system in Faljord, and it's always sort of made it tied to Bilgewater, because Bilgewater has a lot of great ways to activate it before combat, such as Warning Shot. Now, I think this card is actually good enough because what I imagine you're gonna do with this card actually is you're gonna put this onto Teemo in Teemo Sejuani decks. I feel like this card is genuinely not bad on its own. First of all, +1/+2 is not bad when you're putting it onto a Teemo who's about to die to like a 1 mana Thermal Beam or 2 mana Thermal Beam, right? But if you manage to get a Puff Cap to pop on them on their turn before your attack, boom, there you go, +2/+4, and that means Teemo has 5 health, and at that point, I don't know what kills him. Like, you have to be using like Culling Strike or something. At that point, this Teemo might actually be good enough to stay alive for quite a while then. I think this card is actually quite decent. We'll have to see just to what extent and how reliable you can get that to happen, but I think this is more doable than you can imagine, and because of that, I think Spoils of War might actually see quite a bit of play in Teemo Sejuani. I think that this is a perfect card for them. Okay, next up we have the Ionia cards, and now we have the 1 mana 1/1 elusive Shadow Apprentice. When I'm summoned, grant me +1/+1 if an ally has Ephemeral. Now this card is, I think, almost the only thing I really think of is Shadow Seer, which is also, it fits the same sort of archetype of being both ephemeral and an elusive deck. And the question is it really that good? I don't know, I feel like elusives have unfortunately paid the price of pissing off too many people, where now they're not really allowed to be good, and especially not in Ionia. It feels like everywhere else gets really powerful elusives such as Zap or Wigglyfish, and it feels like we're stuck with slightly better elusive Poro, which I mean, like, it's fine, and I think it actually is quite decent, but it definitely does feel a little reserved compared to some of the other elusive offerings in other regions. This is conditional. It's only, even if you hit the condition, it's still just like okay. Like it's very questionable to me. Where I think it see the most play actually is in the full ephemeral elusive decks when you're starting to play Encroaching Shadows. That's where I think this card might see a little bit more success, but even then it's a little debatable of how powerful it could be. That being said, it is a 1 mana elusive, and those are really powerful because you can play them out from your hand really easily, and the opponent might not have any sort of response for you, or they might overextend, right? There's a lot of hypothetical angles there. So this card isn't that bad, but it definitely doesn't excite me the same way that some of the other cards thus far have. Okay, next up we have the 4 mana 1/4 Attune Field Musicians. Each round, once you've summoned 3 other allies, refill your spell mana and draw 1. What a fascinating card. I genuinely don't know what to make of this. I feel like the best uses for this are using things like Eye of the Dragon or Self-Recall. Eye of the Dragon, of course, will spit out a little Dragonling every turn, which will count for 1. And then if you have to play 2 more, you have to refill your spell mana and draw 1. Is this enough to make Monastery see play? Probably not, but like it's a very fascinating card because the payoff is so powerful. Normally I wouldn't even give this card a passing glance, I'll be honest. But the fact that it refills your entire spell mana and draws you 1, it's like, man, they really wanted to push this card's power. The question is just how easy can you do that? I feel like Eye is the easiest way off the top of my head, just to immediately give yourself 1+ credit on it, because summoning 2 allies is pretty easy, especially if you're drawing an extra card every turn. So the question is this going to be a part of like, say, a Bilgewater, Attune Monastery deck? And I have actually played that a couple of times. It's not as bad as you might think it is. So maybe it sees play there as like an engine card, but I don't know. It's a very odd card, if I'm being completely honest. I'm really excited to try it out though, and I think this is something that will at least push Ionia, perhaps in a slightly newer direction, hopefully. Okay, next we have the Noxus cards, which actually have 3 cards compared to everyone else's 2, and they have Strength in Numbers. Summon 2 Legion Marauders. Now, for those who don't know, Legion Marauder is this really funny meme card, basically, which is, I believe, a 3 mana 3/2, that whenever it attacks, it gives itself and other copies of it +1/+1. This is like really slow most of the time, and the whole goal I think originally intended was for you to clone it multiple times with, say, PZ's packages, and then also use cards like Katarina to constantly rally and keep it going for a longer period of time. This is kind of like Misraced without any evasion, basically, right? Now, that being said, this card's pretty decent. Like, if you're running the Legion Marauder deck, let's assume you're running 3, right? Let's assume you've at least played 1 and attacked at least once, right? I think these are all relatively fair assumptions to make, right? The thing is, when you play this on turn 8, that's another +2/+2 to all of your Legion Marauders, right? Because they're both going to attack, right? And they're also going to still have the higher stat total from your other Legion Marauders. Like, this is very spicy, and it's very dangerous. I know it seems like a meme, but genuinely, you might be able to scare some people like crazy just by playing Legion Marauder and then just blowing them up because all your units have 2 billion health because they've all attacked together, right? I don't think it's likely, and I do need to make sure that the Legion Marauders actually do get the buffs if they're given to them, if they get summoned after the buffs have already been applied, because if it doesn't have that, that might be a bit of an issue. But I think this is like very possibly a decent card. I'm gonna give it a try. I'm gonna give it a try. We're gonna try to make Katarina Legion Marauders work. We're gonna make it happen, boys. I promise. But we'll give it a shot at least. I think it's a pretty fun meme card, but I'm definitely gonna at least try to make it a little bit more than just a meme. We'll give it a shot. Okay, next up we have the 4 mana 2/5 Shrieking Spinner. Attack grants spider allies +1/+0. Now, it of course itself is a spider, so it'll typically be attacking as a 3/5. But this is actually quite interesting because normally in spider decks, our 4-drop slot is occupied by crowd favorite, who is the favorite of apparently just a giant group of spiders. But you know, what's really powerful about him is that he forces the opponent to have a tall answer for you. The main weakness of spiders, of course, is that they all have typically low health totals of like 2 or 1 health, right? When you play the crowd favorite on turn 4, you're typically playing him as upwards of a 6/5, 7/6, right? And that makes it the opponent impossible to go for a board wipe, because if they go for a board wipe, they're gonna get hit in the face by the 7/6, and if they kill the 7/6, they're gonna die from all the miniature spiders, right? So the real question here is this gonna be relevant enough, and the attack buff relevant enough, that it will be able to punish opponents who don't have the answer for you? And I'm not certain on that just yet. I do like how it itself has a high health total. It is a 3/5 on its own, so it's very much aware of the issue with spiders. The question is just going to be, is it able to handle itself on its own? Because before you play this card, there's no spiders in the game that will be able to sort of work with it. Another big issue for this card in particular is that it doesn't have Fearsome, which means that it can't be splashed into the Fearsome style of aggressive spider decks that you sometimes see. You kind of have to rely on at least giving it Fearsome, which is a possibility, of course, but it definitely feels a little bit weaker than it could be. Basically, treat this as a card that says 4 mana 2/5 cast Vision every time it attacks. And if you think that's good, it's probably gonna be good. I'm gonna have to test this out and see how much better it can be sometimes than crowd favorite. I feel like it's much more faster paced, but it's also a lot more fragile. So we'll see just how good that can actually be. Okay, the next card is Crimson Bloodletter, the 1 mana 1/2. The next time you summon another ally, deal 1 to it and grant me +1/+1. This card is so interesting to me on multiple levels. First of all, it has memory, which means that when you play it on turn 1, it'll still be able to affect the board even if it dies on turn 3, for example, when you eventually do play that another ally. That's already very powerful. The second thing here is that it's also a perfect curve for you to start curving into your other Crimson effects, which is really, really solid. But also, it is actually a 1 mana 2/3, which lets it trade with so many other cards. It's just an incredibly powerful sort of effect here. So if you combine this with some of the other Scars type cards or Crimson type cards, you're going to start gaining so much more value so much quicker than normal. Because one big issue that there is with sort of the Crimson package in general is how slow the deck sort of takes to take off, right? Because you have to play your cards and then you have to damage them after the fact, and then after that they only then start getting more viable. But this, in say like a Scargrounds deck, you're going to be popping off like crazy, because that means with this and a Scargrounds deck, you will give an opponent 0 opportunity to hit, say, an Ember Maiden when it doesn't have Tough. Because when you play Ember Maiden, it'll deal the damage, it'll get Tough immediately, and then you'll have that bonus effect available for you, right? There's actually quite a few different ways this card can really sort of set up itself in the future, not just for Crimsons, but for the Scar type decks in Faljord as well. I'm actually very fascinated to see like how flexible this card is, because at 1 mana, you don't even have to play it on turn 1. You can wait till a turn where you really need it. You can play this on, say, turn 3, and then turn 4 play Braum and immediately get your Poro before your attack token phase, which means like man, the card is just really good. I think this card is genuinely very solid. We're gonna see just how solid, but I think the fact that it sets itself up so easily ahead of time will be a great reason to run this card in any sort of deck that cares about self-damage. And because of that, I think this is easily the one card I think is gonna see a decent amount of play. Okay, next up we have the 0 mana card Production Surge for slow speed. To play, spend all your mana and then summon random turrets whose total cost equals the amount spent, which is really interesting. This is like Thermo Beam, but instead of a removal spell, it's a summon a bunch of turrets spell. I feel like this is probably the one card you might look forward towards for Heimerdinger if you're really just looking for like an emergency button, so to speak. I'm not too sure if it's like exactly what he wants, but I'm down to see it at least, because the card just seems really flexible if you know what you're doing with it. I think one thing I want to go into the lab, so to speak, and check out is how does it handle not having enough board space, and how does it handle the distribution of mana? Is it truly random, or will it say, if you have 3 spots left, distribute the mana across those 3 spots evenly, randomly? Will I get a bunch of 0-cost turrets because this game hates me? Probably. We'll have to see, of course, but I'm going to try out a couple sort of examples of this deck and sort of at least understand how the card works first. Because if it actually is smart and actually, like, for example, if you have 3 spots, it chooses the 3 highest cost cards of the turrets that make up your cost total and then spreads them onto the 3 spots, then hey, the card's actually pretty good and lets you control a lot of different things. If it's true random and I could just get like a board full of 1/1s, you know, I'm probably not going to be as excited about it. We'll have to see, of course, but as that sort of deck moves on. But I'm going to try it out a couple more times first, and then I'll give you guys my actual thoughts on this later, because it really depends how smart this card is first. Okay, and here is my personal favorite card of this group. It is the 1-mana card, Concurrent Timelines, the slow speed spell. For the rest of the game, the first time you play a follower each round, pick one of 3 followers with the same cost to transform it into. This means when you play, say, a 2-drop, you're going to be given 3 other 2-drops to choose from. Choose one of those, and it enters the board instead of the one you just played. However, what's interesting, though, is that technically speaking, the way it is phrased here, your play effects will still activate when they first initially enter the board, and then they transform after. Now, that doesn't seem incredible until you start looking at cards that have really powerful play effects and see how many of them you can abuse. In PZ in particular, there's cards like Shredder, which deal 1 damage to absolutely everything on the board, but it has a really weak stat line of a 5/2. But he's still a 5-drop, so if you were to swap him into, say, like a 5/5 Scout, it becomes a lot more interesting, right? Like, the card becomes a lot better. Of course, there's a lot of randomness to this, but the fact that you're able to choose between 1 of 3 means there's a lot more possibilities, I think. So I think that's already not too bad. But I think the number one interaction that people are mentioning here is turn 9, you play Ladros. Ladros' spell goes onto the stack, which cuts the opponent's health in half, but then you use him to transform him into the Dreadway, and that doubles all damage, which means it's an instant kill on turn 9. And that is hilarious, because if you actually look at the odds, guys, it's roughly about 50 to 60% odds of getting a Dreadway off of playing Ladros, which means that roughly 50 to 60% of the time you can just straight up win the game if you're playing this card on turn 9, which is like, what? And then the funniest part about it too is that it's even faster than the traditional Ladros Dreadway control, because you play it all in the same turn as the same action. So it's like if the opponent ever overextends or doesn't expect it, you're gonna play turn 9 Ladros and then just 50 to 60% of the time just straight up kill them, and you're gonna laugh so hard. I think this is actually, like, I kept trying to talk myself out of it before talking on this video about it, but I was just like, man, I think this card actually works. Like, I think it's actually gonna be hilarious. And even if you don't hit, say, like, Dreadway, you can hit Bright Steel Formation, which is a 9/9, which still cuts the opponent's health in half, remember? So you're still getting a huge, powerful threat. Like, oh man, I think this card is genuinely pretty good. I think you're gonna fill your entire deck full of really dumb play effects like this, and then go to town with trying to beat them up on turn 9 with Ladros into Dreadway. We'll see just how realistic that is, but honestly, I have seen worse decks perform better than that, and I think I'm actually pretty hyped to try this out. Man, this card, Sea Scarab, 2 mana, 1/2. This is actually a card I've been wanting for a very, very long time, for a variety of reasons. First of all, I think Deep just needs a buff in general, but I don't want it to get so much of a buff that it just becomes unstoppable, because I think it's actually quite close to being good. I thought it just needed like maybe 1 or 2 more tools and it could really get there. But one thing I'm particularly really interested in is that this is an SI monster. Before, we had Terror of the Tides, but that card actually doesn't really function in its own region. You're forced to go to another region for it. At least now there's another card that you can actually look towards to being actually useful, you know? And I think this card is actually quite interesting for that sort of effect. The fact that it constantly fuels your tosses while still being really early on the board state is actually really useful, and I think it'd actually be quite good for that respect. It also works really well with, say, the Maokai packages that we've been seeing, and you might even be able to run this without Nautilus and Bilgewater. It might be hypothetically possible, because if you're just focusing a lot on your allies dying, which are tossing your own deck, which is also, remember, Maokai's other condition is allies dying. So it's almost like when you were letting these allies die with this toss effect, you're almost getting them twice as fast for Maokai's level up. I think this is actually quite decent. And don't make me start if you get duplicates of this out. If you get duplicates of this thing out, it's over. Like, you're gonna hit deep instantly. So I think this is actually quite good. We're gonna see just how far you can take it, but I'm very, very hopeful for this card's future, so to speak, in deep decks. Okay, next up we have the 3 mana 3/2 Soul Spinner. When I'm summoned, grant me +1/+1 and Fearsome if an ally died this round. It itself is also a spider. Now, I know you guys are all thinking, man, Roy's just gonna love this card because it has Fearsome and it's a spider, isn't he? He's not even gonna care that it's like somewhat understated, then you have to play it after combat. He's not gonna care about these things. And you're right, I don't care about these things because this card's broken. Honestly, this card's gonna be so sick because what you're gonna use this for is you're gonna use this on defensive turns before your attack goes out. You'll be able to sacrifice a spider to like chump block, and then boom, you're gonna play a 4/3 Fearsome spider right after that, and you're gonna be like setting up for your next open attack, right? I think a lot of people forget that aggro in this game always sort of has to defend for a little bit just because of how the nature of the turns sort of work, and being able to sacrifice a spider like a 1/1 spider you got off of Elise, for example, just to set up this 3/2. It's almost like this 3/2 is entering the board and it says eat the spider, get +1/+1. It's almost like that, and we already know that with Masked Mother that's an archetype that already is proven to be at least somewhat ideal, I think, in my opinion. So I think this is actually quite good. So we're gonna sort of see how this sort of card operates when it sort of hits the board on a larger scale. The biggest point against this card is that it shares the mana cost with Skitterer, which is a card, another spider aggro card you kind of want to run instead. But I think you're not playing this on turn 3 on the curve like you might sometimes do with Skitterer. I think this card is being played a little bit later to set up for one other big attack turn. Other than that though, I think the card is decent, and I do really like how it's able to survive an avalanche. That's the big thing for me personally. Otherwise though, I think I'm excited to try out this card and we'll see where it lands. Okay, next up we have the 2-mana landmark, Star Tip Peak. Countdown 2, create 2 random celestial cards that cost 3 or less in hand. This is interesting. So you're paying 2 mana for essentially 2 uses of randomized star chart. Is that worth it? My heart says no, because like, why are you not just playing Zoe? But maybe you're playing both, but even then, I'm very questionable if you really want to wait 2 turns for these card effects to get into your hand. The big benefit of the 3 cost or less cards when they're being added is that they're incredible tempo plays, right? A lot of them are just very, very efficient and very, very quick. When I mean this, I mean like, for example, the Snake Challenger 2/1 is really, really good on the turn. You can get it out really quickly because usually you're using it to kill like a Zoe, using it to kill a Teemo, using it to kill a priority target in general, right? Sometimes you want Crescent Strike, and Crescent Strike will be there for you to stun out a board so they lose a huge attack on you, right? But the thing is with this sort of card though, is that it feels with the randomized element and it being delayed, it doesn't really do either of those things quite well. When you're looking at the 4 to 5 to 6 cost cards, those ones are all sort of value generator cards or cards that are about answering enemy threats. This card gives you like on turn, if you play this on turn 2, you're gonna get the cards on turn 4, and you're only gonna get 2 celestial cards that are like better in the early mid game anyways. So it's just like, you know, I'm not excited is what I'm saying here. I feel like there's too many bad combinations that you could get that just aren't really useful, especially given the circumstance. The really powerful part about Star Chart and cards like it is that you're able to quickly choose which ones you want, but this one, it definitely does feel like you're going to get the short end of the stick too often for me to really care about it. So I'm not a huge fan of this card overall. Okay, and next up we have the last card here, and that is Destiny's Call. The 8-mana burst speed, grant an ally in hand 8/8/8, and wow, I think this is actually quite interesting because I feel like your main target is going to be a Sparklefly. You're going to play this on turn 5 on a Sparklefly, you're going to play the Sparklefly on turn 6, and then they have to pray to God they have a vengeance because that thing is never going to die. This card is actually pretty crazy. I think it's surprisingly decent compared to what you might expect it to be. Just playing this onto, say, like again, a Sparklefly or any sort of lifesteal or threat that can enter the board and like really clog up the game is really going to get you a lot of value. Sparklefly just happens to have elusive as well, which makes it very difficult to answer. I think even with like a quick spell shield as well, like think about it, you play this on turn 5, right? You're gonna have 6 mana the turn after this. You're gonna be able to play the Sparklefly on turn 2 with as a 9/10, and then on top of that, you're gonna still hold up 4 mana for Bastion. Like it's kind of spooky. I think this card is kind of crazy. We'll have to see just how reliable that ends up being, and if you can survive the earlier turn so that you can set yourself up to put yourself in that position to begin with. But I think it's a lot more reasonable than you might think. All right, everyone, thank you so much for watching. That is the final card that we had revealed to us today. I'm really excited to sort of try these out. This is like probably the best day for any deck builder because there's so many current decks that you can now upgrade and sort of tune and try out some new combinations. I'm really excited, honestly. This is going to be a lot of fun. Next up, we do have Sivir tomorrow, which is going to be super, super interesting. And then after that, we'll have LeBlanc, then one more day of Shurima cards, and then the day after that, we'll finally have the God Emperor himself, Azir. So I'm really excited for the final sort of steps here towards the end of Shurima. The expansion's looking great so far. Hopefully it ends just as strong as this. Otherwise, though, I think that'll be it for me. If you have any questions or want to talk to me about more of these cards, or if you want to see some of the decks I'm building with these cards right now, come join us in the Discord. The Discord is open for everyone. We'll be hanging out there, talking about all the new cards, that sort of thing. It's gonna be super fun. Otherwise, though, I'll probably be heading out now. Thank you so much again for watching. Peace out.